Will the gender identity politics play an important role in determining the winner of this election? Because when you look at Democratic Party, they are very much into it. And when you look at Republican Party, they are deadly against it. So what is your view on that? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lungleng show again. And this show is coming after quite a few weeks. So we feel that it's high time for us to start discussing on various issues again. But tonight it's going to be a very, very important discussion because I have a very special guest by the name Liz Schuelke. And she is a US policy analyst as well as known as a political commentator on US politics, and she has worked with Deutsche Welle, which is a German news channel or German media, a big German media company organization that she has worked for. And she's very well known when it comes to US politics, and she has been very consistently present or involved with the campaigns for US presidential election, even in the past. And she has worked as a German Chancellor Fellow as well. And also she has worked for US State Department for the ambassador. So it's a great and wonderful opportunity for us to have this discussion with someone directly from US. And she is currently in Baltimore, which is not far away from Washington, D.C. So talking to someone who is not far away from Washington, D.C. or US politics is the best thing that can happen today. So thanks for joining me, Liz, for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
It's been quite a long time, not having to talk to any of our colleagues, but you'll be the first person to be present here and have this conversation. So I have been quite interested to talk about the US politics, and like it or not, US politics and US election is something that the whole world is watching every time when the election comes. So it will be very enriching for us as well as especially for our viewers, mainly the Indian citizens, to learn more about what's going on in the US and to understand a lot of the nuances of politics that's happening in the US. So directly jumping into this question, we can directly start with something like United States is, as we all know, highly polarized when it comes to politics as well as to social life, apparently. And this polarization seems to have affected a lot of people, especially the US citizens, in many ways, directly or indirectly. Because the left has gone extreme left, the right has gone extreme right, and which has somehow also led to the rise of populism, which is somehow similar to the right-wing character. So the question is, why do you think this sort of polarization happens? Because we didn't see this kind of polarization in the recent past, but it seems to have picked up a pace, very recently. So what do you think, or what do you say on that?
I absolutely think it's picked up. I use my own life as like a barometer. So I grew up in Texas, which is a very conservative state, and I went to a state university there. And I have friends that I remember one time at a party, we said, you don't discuss religion and you don't discuss the military, politics. And so we just didn't. And we believe all kinds of things and we support all kinds of candidates. And I just don't know that freshmen going into university now are having those experiences. I think a lot has informed me in a way that maybe some folks on the East Coast or more traditional Democrats or on more conservative sides, they're not mixing the way we used to. I really think, it was things I supported, candidates I supported, but it wasn't my entire identity. So I absolutely think it's upticked. I'm really excited in 20 or 30 years when some PhD student does a historic look back at some of the cursors. They talk a lot about economics being a player. So if we look back in historical global contexts of what has caused extreme polarization, what has caused really conservative or really left-wing candidates to rise, there's been a lot of economic dips that have happened. So some folks are saying this is coming off of the Great Recession that happened here. I also think it can't be undermined, even though we have kind of Trump as we see this drop in the water of everything after Trump. I think it started earlier. We had the Tea Party coming out in opposition to President Obama. And I think America loves a pendulum swing, whether it's, we go really this way and then we kind of ease back this way. There's a really famous American quote that says, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And what it means by that is like, you're going to go through a lot of this, and in the end, we kind of end up there. But I think it can't be understated that there was an extreme reaction to having an African-American president and having Barack Obama, that was this new generation that ushered in things like legalizing gay marriage, our attempt at universal health care, that kind of thing. So I think it's been building, but Trump was a bit like the strike on the dynamite match.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So in a sense, you're also saying that this sort of polarization more or less started a little bit from the presidency of Barack Obama as well.
I think it put some things, gave a lot of people motivation on either side, and kind of catalyzed a lot of things. And I think also there was that moment, if you look at the other things that were happening globally at the same time, at the end of President Obama's presidency, you had Brexit happening, you had the AfD, which is a very conservative party in Germany, being for the first time in government. You had conservative parties kind of cropping up, as well as, just kind of these extremes. So it's happening elsewhere, but America was just kind of primed to be particularly extreme.
Mm-hmm. And as someone who is living in the US in the midst of this polarization, or the climax of this polarization, does it affect your daily life in any way as someone who lives in the US?
I'm not sure too much. I say that and I'm like taking it back a little bit. Like I said, I'm from Texas. I have friends that are all kinds of different political ideologies, but I think more than in the past, things like you'll see bumper stickers. Okay, we've always had bumper stickers that support one candidate over the other, but they've gotten really aggressive. There's a lot of bumper stickers that are not, I support this person and you support this person, or I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican. There are things like, there's a very famous one on the right that says one word, but it really means something very nasty and aggressive towards President Biden. There's a lot of, and the same on the left, on the extreme left, I would say. There are just a lot of, I think it is more, you're a little more aware of, should I reveal this thing? And I think there's a lot of more people drawing hard lines, like maybe we wouldn't date someone that was a different political ideology. And I'm just not sure that was the case 10 years ago.
Well, that's quite interesting. And how things have evolved as a society, where, when you look at the past, you don't seem to be so much conscious of like what your ideology is. Now, I think like, as you have also correctly mentioned, when the time has come, at least in a time like this, you have to be, or one has to be very conscious of which ideological camp you belong to. And you have to be really, really cautious of like what people think when you do something or others. So relating to that, when you see the Republican candidates now, I mean, I just want to come back to the election, which is really, really catching the attention of the world as well. You can see that Republican Party, they have like a bunch of, I think they have around 12 candidates at this time.
Sure.
Yeah, they have 12 candidates. And when we analyze the personality, or, the candidates or the progress of each contender or the candidates, I think when you even look at the polls and surveys polls done by pollsters, you see that, Donald Trump, the President Donald Trump, despite his number of indictments and, number of criminal charges against him, he seems to be leading, among the Republican voters. But when you look at it, when you listen from the left group, you seem to have formed this opinion that, Trump is somewhat a racist person, homophobic person, or all sorts of white supremacists. But my question is like, despite all of this, how has Trump wave come into being, despite him, being termed or being called all these names in the US? I mean, that's something as an outsider, we are very curious to know about.
I think we're also curious. No, it's a really interesting phenomenon, and I was interviewed by Deutsche Welle talking really early in the year, and they were talking about DeSantis, who's the governor of Florida, young guy, really popular. He won this election in the midterms, which is our cycles in between presidents, and people said, "Oh, we should watch out. He's like the new Trump," and in the time since, I have come to the realization personally, there is no Trump but Trump. DeSantis isn't doing as well. Trump's endorsed candidates, if you look at them in the midterms, do not do well. Every single one of his candidates that was an election denier, so they say that, you know, the 2020 election was rigged, every single one lost. So what's the deal? Like, this adds a layer of complexity to why is Trump so successful in a way that it's not really a movement, right? It's really about him. And I think some things to point out are he's not running away with the general election, right? He lost. And in fact, he lost the popular vote in both 16 and in 20, and he lost the electoral, which is our fun little wrinkle in democracy America has, where the people go out and vote, and then we have elected, but not by their secret, folks representing every state that then they cast their ballot, and that's ultimately how we decide who's president. And this kind of division has created the situation in 2016 where more Americans voted for Hillary Clinton, but Trump won more of the secret electors. In 2020, Biden won both. All right, so what happened? And I remember this story, and who knows, this could be an urban legend at this point, but he was approached by the Republican Party a few years before 2016. And they said, "We think you should run for governor of New York." And New York's an incredibly powerful state. And he was like, "No, I'm going to run for president." And the quote I remember is, he said, "I'm going to suck all the oxygen out of the room." And what for me that means is he is so good at marketing himself. And I don't know what he believes anymore. You know, there's all these clips of him from the 90s saying, "I'm pro-choice when it comes to women's right to choose." And yet here he is in 2016 saying, "I would never." He was never a religious man. And then all of a sudden, folks of faith are putting their hands on him. He is incredibly adept at marketing himself. And he found a very vocal minority, and they're a minority in the Republican Party, and they're definitely a minority in America, but they're vocal and they're active. And so they feel really present. And one of the things about our primary system, which is the elections we have before we have the big one where we decide who's going to be the candidate, they always bring out folks on the tails. The general tends to go towards the center, and the primaries go more on the tails of either party, because who's going to do that extra voting? Voting's already hard. We already don't get a day off for it. You have to know all the candidates. Who's going to get out there? And it's the more active voters. So first, it's about 50% of the country voting in either primary. So we've already whittled that down from 100 to 50. And of that, maybe only 50% vote. So if you're 30% of the party, but your ideology votes at 80%, you're going to take up a huge portion. So I think that's a part of it, is why he's so successful. I'm sorry, I have cats that have decided to be psychos right now. Please edit that out.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, no one would mind seeing cats in the background, so it's so cute.
They just crashed somewhere, so I hope you can hear it. But yeah, so I would just say, I think he's so good at marketing himself. He's leaned into everything that gets him attention and everything that gets him votes. And I think he's even more extreme than he was almost 8 years ago now.
Okay, so, but he has served the country as the president for the last 4 years, as the 45th president of the United States. Do you think he did something good for the country?
That is a good question. I think his first push for the stimulus was correct with COVID. Also, he pushed for vaccines while also being against them. It was a weird time. This is a very good question.
Yeah.
I remember when he was elected, one of the things I thought is like bureaucracy is slow, and America has set up this system on purpose so that change doesn't happen overnight. So it's hard in 4 years to see a massive difference. What he did is he laid a lot of building blocks. And if he'd had 4 more years, I think a lot of the things he wanted to accomplish really would have happened for good and bad. Um, yeah. And so it's just hard. And it's hard to separate, for me personally, to separate him, like what he might have done in office, from what he stirred up as a culture. I remember when he was elected, his vice president was Vice President Pence.
Yes.
Conservative candidate, but very traditional politician, which is probably why he was picked. And SNL, our like comedy Saturday Night Live show, did a skit where they were like, "Thank you, Pence, for being the only reason Democrats don't want to impeach Trump." Meaning, if Pence got in, he's as conservative, but he's actually effective. He knows how government works. He knows how bureaucracy works. It was scarier. I've changed my opinion in more recent years, because I think Trump, while he's not as effective at the government, he's so much more effective at the culture. And so maybe I hold him to a standard less on what he did as a president and more on what he did to how he contributed to this American polarization.
Now, just in case, like I have also mentioned that he has been indicted for, I think, quite several times, and there are more than 90 criminal charges still. Just in case, if he is not going to be the presidential candidate from the Republican Party, who do you think from the other Republican Party candidates at this moment would be the right fit to replace? I mean, from your opinion.
That is such a good question. And again, not to bring up more history, but in 2016, it was a very similar situation where there was a ton of candidates. And there was some young candidates that were saying, "I'm the new future of the party." And there were some traditional old candidates like Jeb Bush of the Bushes. And so one of the things that they didn't do, because they never expected Trump to win. In fact, one of his biggest supporters now, back then, had a slogan called "Never Trump." So it's just how the tides change. What they didn't do is they didn't coalesce around one candidate. And that is how Trump, who never won the majority of the Republican Party, won the nomination. He always won the plurality. And so as a result, none of the other candidates they didn't make a name for themselves. They didn't stand out. And I see the same thing happening now. And one of the things that happened in 2016 is someone would be super hot for like a month. I remember there was like 2 weeks where it was Rick Perry. And then now we're like, that was silly. Rick Perry would never get elected. But at the time you have this like, and I think we're seeing that there's a candidate, Vivek, and he was super hot after the debates. I'd hold my horses to see if it has staying power. I mean, the most likely candidate is definitely DeSantis. He has, he's an incumbent. He's a governor. He has name recognition, but he's doing so poorly in fundraising. What does that mean? So it's really tough. I would probably put those two at the top of potential, but we'll see who else jumps in. And let's say Trump completely removes himself. It would be interesting if the party decided to kind of form around one person to make sure their person gets through. Because right now it really is a whole bunch of different types of conservative ideology within that primary.
Still relating to that, do you think, like you have mentioned about Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, he seems to be, I mean, he is the next person to Trump when you even look at the rating and the polls among the Republicans. Just in case, like as an Indian, I would like to know your view on Vivek Ramaswamy as well, like how he is performing in the presidential election process at the campaign. So how is he performing when you look at the last debates, primary debates as well? We have seen his performance. So what do you think about him? Like, what is your view on his policies and how is he radical, or what do you think about this guy?
What does radical even mean anymore? I think he's incredibly well-spoken. And what that means is he has a stage presence. So the debates, when they're televised, one of the things that consistently hurts DeSantis is he's kind of awkward. Vivek doesn't have that. He's got charisma. He's incredibly good at marketing himself. All of these line up with his background. And what you're going to hear is my opinion when it comes to any candidate that's coming completely outside of government. The Democrats had the exact same thing in 2016. Andrew Chang, as an entrepreneur, ran. No one would go and be the CEO of a tech company without ever having done anything in tech or anything in business. We sometimes, because it is elected by the people, and I do think folks of all walks of life should get involved in their local government, but start somewhere. Figure out what it looks like to actually be an executor. The president has to be an executor for the country, and they have to make these really important decisions. They also have to know how to work within bureaucracy. When I used to work for the government, they always said there's two learning curves, and one of them is the actual content of the job, whatever skill you're bringing, and the other is learning how to work in a bureaucracy. And not to bring up President Obama, but that was probably one of his biggest like stumbling blocks in the beginning of his presidency, is he really didn't know how the machine worked. And he had Vice President Biden at the time, which was the idea. So you're going to bring a bit of wisdom to the place, but somebody with a little bit more experience might have come up with a different healthcare plan, for example. So I'm just not, that is where I sit on when someone has zero experience. I'm like, if you're super passionate about public service, why aren't you running for Congress? Why aren't you running for lieutenant governor, getting some experience, becoming a governor, becoming a congressperson for 10 years, and then running for president? And so it always makes me a little suspicious. So I think he's great at campaigning, and I'm very suspicious, questioning his ability to actually govern.
That makes quite a lot of sense. He's such a freshman, and as an entrepreneur, he has not had any experience about the government and even in the politics. And he has also expressed that by himself. But his justification is that, he has the issue and he has the people's support. And he can always take counsels from colleagues or from people who are very well experienced. Anyway, leaving him aside, I think now let's look at Biden. Biden being the president right now. From as an outsider having a very superficial knowledge about the US politics, as an observer, we see Biden as someone not performing publicly very well, because he will be gagging, he will be not able to express things that he wants to express. And as an outsider, when we view Biden, we don't expect such performance on how he interacts with people, as a US president. So we expect someone who would be very good at expressing ideas, and who would be very good at negotiations, and who would be able to understand people's sentiments. And all of this combined, we expect such package from the president. Despite Biden having this, he has been elected as the president of the United States and serving for the last almost, more than 3 years. What are his chances of getting elected in the next election?
I think you raised a ton of really great points. And Biden, much like Trump, is a kind of conundrum on one side, Biden is on the other, because if you look at a lot of things, like America most likely avoided a recession under Biden. They passed the biggest infrastructure bill because our bridges are literally collapsing. I was living in a city right when I returned to America where the bridge just fell into the water since the 1950s. And yet he just does not perform well in polls and on a national scale the way you would expect an incumbent president. You were talking about, you really expect them to be able to be eloquent speakers and presenters. And that's really what Obama had. And now, as I always joke at myself, I was the young person that was like, yes, we need change, we need difference. And now I'm the old person that says, let's just get somebody in there that knows what they're doing. So I think the places where Biden has performed way better than if you just look at his speeches or his debates is actually one-on-one. He's incredibly personal and empathetic. And so whenever you see him in a crowd shot, he'll go right up to that person and he'll listen to them, and he might remember something about them. It kind of harkens back to Reagan and Clinton, that were known as these, it's called retail politician. They can go in a diner and they're going to shake every single room. Obama wasn't about that. Obama wanted really big speeches, which is where he shined. So I think ultimately America has been so close in the last elections, even with Trump in either one, 20 or 16, that somewhat it comes down to the candidate. I think so many people are just voting along party lines. And I think the secret hand that always plays a massive role is the economy.
That's true.
And if the economy really feels strong going into, the economy was really bad in 2008. That did not help Bush. He was also very unpopular at that time, but I can't imagine the state of the economy didn't help Obama. As well as in 2020, we were coming off this pandemic and the economy isn't kind of what Trump had promised when the stock market was super high. So I think it will be like an invisible factor in the background. So I think, the incumbent always has an advantage. And I think it will come out how a lot of our last elections come out within 1 or 2 percentage points either direction. But I think he stands as good a chance as anyone on the right. I would hate to. I definitely wouldn't count him out.
Now that you have mentioned about the economy as the invisible kind of force or impetus in determining even the presidency or the victory of the presidential election, when I look up some of the data about the U.S. economy at this time, the Wall Street Journal's poll shows that 57% of the people, there is a disapproval on Biden's economy by, the U.S. voters, and about only 42%, approve Biden's economy at this time. So when you look at it, even due to the war, the Ukraine-Russia war, I think the economy seems to have been affected. The inflation in the oil prices in US, which used to be $1.5 per gallon, I think, but at this time it's above $5 or something. I'm not up to date on that. So it seems like the economy has been somehow affected. So do you think this will even impact the upcoming election between Biden and, let's say, anyone from the Republican presidential candidates?
Absolutely. And, we were talking about Trump's major accomplishments. He really touted his economy, right? The stock market was in an absolute boom. I will also attest to that. There was not the inflation that we're seeing right now. But much of what we've been discussing today is that there's just so many contradictions within one area we're studying. So at the same time, Trump had really high unemployment. And wages were lower. So there's like layers to the economy. And so one of the things about Biden is the stock market is not wonderful. How much does the stock market affect what we call the average Joe, not just Joe Biden, versus unemployment's at an amazing low, lower than they even predicted. And wages have risen. So the real ability to buy things has risen, but the inflation remains stubborn. There is a movement in the Republicans to really be against the Ukraine war, which is really interesting because they were always the anti-Russia party. Like in 2012, Mitt Romney, his big thing was our biggest foreign security issue is Russia. And everyone on the left kind of laughed at him like, oh, it's not the Cold War, which is funny that he's right now. But, so their feeling is, and I think Vivek talks about this, is like have national security at home. If we work better in our country, we don't need to worry about other countries. It's also something you're seeing in Europe. There's a huge rise in the conservative right in Germany, kind of an unprecedented rise, and a huge push is anti-Ukraine war. So it absolutely will play a factor. It really, it just really depends on how it looks a year from now, because already from the last year, inflation has stabilized. The housing market, the rates aren't going up. So that's a positive, but people really aren't moving either. So I absolutely think it'll play a factor. And it's, the phrase low hanging fruit is the lowest hanging fruit or any Republican can go after, because they always say it's like kitchen table conversations. That's what folks think about. And they think about like groceries are really expensive right now. And they think about, I can't buy a house because the rates are so high.
Yes, I think, and the worsening of the economy affects the common people or the middle class people at the most. And when you look at the vote share, the middle class people would be occupying the majority of the share of the votes. So when the economy is bad, they are bad. They're the worst affected. So that really, quite makes sense a lot. Now the question, as a follow up to that, is when you look at the Republican vote, Republican parties, I mean, agenda as well as the Democratic Party agenda. Democratic Party is more on the side of favoring the war. I mean, favoring the Ukraine to exist itself as a sovereign country against the Russia. But when you look at on the other side, majority of the Republican Party's people, they are favoring for the fact that the war should be ended and any sort of funding for Ukraine should be stopped immediately. So, and it seems like the Republican people, the voters, care so much about what's happening in the country. So this brings me to a question like, is the Democratic Party being oblivious of the kind of this, the mindset or the lifestyle of the people in what's happening around the country, and the feeling of becoming disaffected by the common people in the US? I mean, what's your take? Here I'm trying to understand what the people of America really think about this.
I think you're going to get two completely different answers. If you ask a Republican, absolutely, they don't. They're elitist. They don't care about we have the Rust Belt, which are these former industrial towns where folks have lost their jobs for decades now, and there's no social mobility, there's no economic growth. And they've really forgotten the person who used to work in a factory that now is making the same as someone who works at McDonald's. And they're saying, where did my livelihood go? And if you ask the people on the left, they're going to say, of course, we think about America. We're the ones supporting minorities. We're the ones supporting the poor. President Biden passed this child tax credit that would have given money monthly to folks for kids. And yet the Republicans voted it down. They're saying, what? You care about kids and you don't want to give people a credit for it? So everything is so steeped in ideology. It's really hard to look at either side and say, oh, they're doing something good. Also, as a global person and someone that lived in Germany, I think it is caring about America to check Russia and to be concerned about where this is going. As I said, President Biden was probably selected by President Obama to be the vice president because of how long he'd been in government. But one of the biggest things that he had that Obama didn't was foreign policy experience. He'd sat on the foreign policy committees in Congress forever. And I think one of the things he's done really well from a European perspective is how he's handled this. He's taken a lot of cues from European allies. He's really supported monetarily, but let the UK and Germany kind of set the tone on policy. So I think they're excited, the politicians, I don't know about the folks actually in these countries, of how he's handled it. And so it is forever when the economy's hurting and we're putting money overseas, it's always going to be a sore subject because it feels as if we could just take that money and keep it at home, but that's actually not how government budgets work. And I do think it's supporting the American people to have these checks in place and to support our allies. But I can absolutely see where the criticism, where they're feeling that penny pinch and feeling like the Democrats just don't even care.
Yes, and because that when you observe the sentiments of the people, like on social media or on internet, I think what the common people seem to care from our observation is that they care too much about their domestic issues rather than foreign policies. Like they want to stop the influx of immigrants and they want to stop the funding they criticize the lack of funding for the border wall, by the Biden administration, and gun control, frequent mass shootings, climate change. All these are, race issues, inflation of oil prices. All these are domestic issues. So which issue do you think will lead the party into winning this election? Because when you look at Democratic Party, it looks like they're really concerned about the foreign policies, which makes a lot of sense as well. But when you look at the Republican Party, they care so much about the domestic issues that most of them don't care about what's happening around the world. Like you say, correctly mentioned, you want to care for your allies as well, to check on Russia, which is also a diplomacy. As a superpower country in the world, you have a responsibility as well. But now when the election is coming up, and a Democratic Party cannot risk losing election because voters are not able to understand how important it is to care for your allies. So what's your take on that?
I remember Deutsche Welle asking me the same thing leading up to they said, oh, how much is foreign policy? And I think as a German, you really want America to care about foreign policy. And I said, oh, I just don't know. I think it's going to come down to economy and ideology. Unfortunately, I don't think I would have said that 10 years ago. But now it's, I think, one of the weakest strategies the Democrats have, but it also gets folks to the ballots, is an anti-Trump stance. It's going to be a lot of, we're not that guy. And of course, Trump in his own camp will be saying, I was that guy, so vote for me. If Trump is the nominee, of course, who knows how that's going to go. But yeah, I think foreign policy, it's going to just be something Democrats have to defend rather than something they can hold up and say, look at this great work we did. Because forever, the border and immigration is an easy thing to go after because it just scares people, not really based in fact. And then Ukraine and spending money over there. And I think the Republicans have taken a wise strategy of not necessarily being pro-Russia. They're more saying, we need that money home. Let Europe take care of that.
Yeah. Well, and this will be a big task even for the Democratic Party to counter the Republicans' strategy. Because I agree with you, like Republicans here are taking more advantage, and they are trying to let people know and create more awareness about what's gonna affect the country the most. And the daily common people, they don't care much about what's happening. They care about what goes inside their mouth for the day-to-day food and whatnot. So, and when I looked up some data again, and there is a data that shows more than 60% of voters, that means registered voters, indicated in the poll that they do not consider President Biden mentally up for the job of being president. So I want to really understand why Democratic Party is still really adamant and hesitant about projecting someone else from the party. Just thinking out loud that there is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And he seems to be even picking up pace among the Democratic Party, but he's complaining that the poll or whatever is going to happen among the Democratic Party is getting rigged. I don't know how far that's true. That's how he blames. So why cannot Robert F. Kennedy be a good option as the presidential candidate from the Democratic Party?
I'm going to give you two answers, and one's going to be the machine of how politics works, and one's going to be more ideology or supporting Biden. And so the machine of politics is, I mentioned it before, there's a thing called the incumbency advantage. And this goes all the way down to, if you're the mayor of a city, the rates at which Congress people get reelected is astronomical, because as soon as you're the incumbent, folks that don't pay that much attention, they just remember seeing your name and they think, oh, that's always been my mayor. Oh, that's always been my incumbency. There was an election in a city of Pittsburgh last year where the incumbent lost for the first time in like how many ever decades, because it's so massive to be the sitting person. For example, if you look at presidents, Jimmy Carter in the 70s did not win re-election. H.W. Bush in 1992 didn't win re-election, but he was coming off of 8 years of being vice president. So he had already served 12 years. And then Trump. And so it's just very rare that someone doesn't get reelected. So there's this piece of, it could be 2 or 3 percentage points. And when I'm talking about every single election has been 49-51, another thing kind of on politics is why you don't replace a sitting president. at this stage. If he was going to at all, it would have been before November 2022. And when we got to November 2022, and it was very obvious he wasn't turning it over to his vice president, partly because all of his candidates were successful. I think that the outcome of 22 would have really influenced what the Democrats are doing now. And instead, what was supposed to be this conservative wave across the country, not only did Democrats kind of stop it, they picked up in a few places. And so it really flipped on its head what everybody thought was going to happen. So if you replace the head of your party, it creates instability, right? You think they don't trust him. Who are they going to choose? Not somebody that's already been president. It creates a turmoil. So the advantage is gone of being the incumbent, and you have a disadvantage of instability. So I think those are like the political reasons why you would do it, is you want to project consistency, stability. You want to take advantage of the fact he's already the sitting president. I think the ideological or pro-Biden reasons are Democrats genuinely believe he's done very well. And there is this public opinion against that contradiction we keep seeing in American politics, where he's passed some really major bills, and he's done some good things for the economy, and handling COVID, which is always going to be steeped in controversy. But a lot of things say, that the recession wasn't as hard as it could have been because of some things him and Trump both did around stimulus. So I don't think a lot of actual, I'm talking about that primary again, where you have the more devoted voters. I don't think those folks are the ones questioning Biden. I think it's independent center voters, maybe Democrats that only vote in the general elections. As far as RFK is concerned, there's a lot that would say he's not a Democrat. He skirts both lines. He really does. He has a lot of very conservative ideology and a lot of traditional Democratic ideology as well. I'm going to go back to my classic. He has no experience. If I'm going to say that about the other candidates, I'll say it about him too. I understand he was born into a family with experience, but that doesn't mean he's actually. Why isn't he running for Congress? If he cares about this, why isn't he running for something at home? Why isn't he his town council member? Why isn't he the mayor? And I think he's the same type of thing I said I was seeing on the right, where you get this bump because you're new and exciting and flashy. And we haven't heard anything from him in weeks. And I don't think he's a legitimate contender. The worst thing he could do would be to run as an independent. We've had a history of folks running as independents in the general election and kind of spoiling the vote, depending on which side of the party they ran for. Ross Perot is a really famous one in the 90s that kept running and, getting 5% of the vote, but it's just enough. Again, if you have that super tight margin, and if they only take from one side of the political ideology, maybe RFK would take from both sides, because like I said, I think he does both sides. So I don't see him as serious at all. The Democrats never considered him, and I would say if anyone would take over, it would be the vice president, because they're trying to keep that stability, keep that consistency. But she's also not popular, so they're sticking with what they got.
Yeah. I think they have to make some very tough choice on this matter. And like you correctly said, RFK has a lot of supporters, even from the right, and on at the same time he's claiming to be a Democrat. So the voters are split. Democratic voters could be supporting him as well, but at the same time there are a lot of people supporting this guy from the right as well. But now you have mentioned even that the Democratic Party, as an incumbent political party for the US government, has to harness the advantage of incumbency so that it creates a look of stability in the government, which is very, very important. However, the Speaker of the House, which is Kevin McCarthy, has just launched or announced inquiry into Biden's family to start the impeachment process. So imagining that if this impeachment process is successful in the House, and if the House gave the consent, and let's say the Senate cannot, when it goes to the Senate, they cannot, object, or they cannot just get rid of it, so that, let's say the impeachment process is even passed in the Senate, and imagining that he's been impeached, or first of all, can you comment on this impeachment process that has been just launched?
So the impeachment process is kind of weird and complicated because with pretty little support, you can launch a hearing exactly as he did, right? And as you know, the Democrats did it twice to Trump.
Yes.
And to be actually impeached, it has to go through, as you correctly stated, the Senate and the House and be voted on. And it would be an incredible uphill battle. And one of the forever hesitations is if one party does something, you have to imagine, if you're a member of that party, you have to imagine the other party doing that same thing in the worst way possible. So when the Democrats went after Trump twice, it really opened the door for impeachment just being used whenever. Before that, it was quite rare. But now it seems as though, because Biden hasn't had many major scandals. The Hunter Biden one, his son, is the biggest one, despite multiple investigations saying he had nothing to do with it. And I understand that ideology Trump's ideology is going to filter how you interpret that. But even Republican hearings and things like that have not found a connection. So it feels as though it's always just going to be a political weapon from here on out. We're just going to continue seeing this. If a Republican's in president, the Democrats will impeach. And it just dilutes the whole process. It really hurts us as a country. And it hurts me personally, because that's not what I believe in. And I believe in the government. I believe in politicians on both sides of the aisle. And I believe it's important for our government to have that conflict, to have multiple perspectives. And when we make it where every single president will get impeached for something, it really just takes all the legitimacy out of our country. So obviously, I actually don't even see a lot of support within his party for this. He has to be doing it for a reason he feels like will help him. He hasn't been seen as a particularly strong Speaker of the House within his own party. So this could be getting some favors or getting some votes from folks he really needs to like him. So we'll see. Could be totally wrong here, but I don't see it going very far.
But putting ourselves into a scenario where, President Biden is impeached, how would the Democratic Party turn around this upcoming election and make sure
that would be really hard?
Yeah,
it would be really hard because, one, the Democrats tend to position themselves as the party that takes the higher road. For example, scandals come out on the right for officials. Maybe they had an extramarital affair, or maybe someone accuses them of inappropriate behavior. And the Republicans tend to all get together, put up their shields and say, we'll protect you. This isn't true. Versus on the left, more typically, and I'm not saying always, they tend to be the ones that say, hey, we have this honor code and you broke it, get out. Very famously, a senator was asked to leave during Obama's presidency from the left. Okay, so if they support him and he is impeached, one, they can say, well, ideologically, we don't agree with this. But for it to pass, that means some Democrats would have had to vote for it. So if he's truly committed something that is deserving of an impeachment, to maintain their status as the party that takes the higher road, they would have to pull back. I wonder if either side would be able to see past ideology in that case, and two, it would really kneecap their ability to go after Trump, because a big piece of going after Trump is, look at all these things he's done. While he was president, he committed all these crimes. He's unsafe. He's a danger to America. He commits crimes. And so if you have Biden legitimately impeached, you can't turn around and say that about Trump. So it would be a very, very, I don't want to imagine that world, because it would be so destabilizing for America, because there's no winners, right? We're talking about two candidates potentially. It would be a sad day for American democracy. So I think it would be a really, really tough scramble from the Democrats to decide, are they going to move it over to Kamala and risk it, or would they support Biden regardless.
So in America, America doesn't really have any candidates better than Trump and President Biden at this time, or is it just the politics and the power that comes with them?
I was talking to somebody about this recently, and it's the thought I have, because I think about this a lot. And again, I have found myself, the longer I've been in the process, saying, I do like people that have experience. I do like people that have skills to bring to the table besides just what I call the celebrity of politics. That said, I think Biden and Trump are the most likely candidates. I think Biden does bring a lot to the table. You were talking about, a president is as good as the people he surrounds himself with, the advisors, the ministers. And I think Biden has done a good job of that. I think for the Democrats, he brings all this wisdom. Do I think it's the best that America can offer? No. I think America is this country of over 300 million people with so many backgrounds, so much experience. There is someone right now sitting as a mayor that in 15 years will blow us away, right? And what happened is, I'm actually going to put this more on the fault of the Democrats than the Republicans. They didn't build what I call down the ballot. They didn't think about those mayors. They didn't think about those outside of Congress. We're always looking at Congress. The president's an executor. So where are our governors? Where are our mayors? Where are our lieutenant governors? Or where are Congress people? There's just, I always say to Democrats that are saying, but who else then, somebody, it's got to be somebody besides Biden. And I go, who? Point me in that direction. I see a lot of folks right now that in 4 or 8 years could be really interesting. And I think it's because since 2018, the Democratic Party has done a significantly better job building people up. I think America has so much potential, and it is a crying shame that we have 2 over 70-year-old politicians, but it is what we have. And I do think for the Democrats and for America, Biden has been a very good president and would be fine for another 4 years. And I'm excited to see how America brings up talent in the future.
Interesting. Now, looking at some of the candidates from the Republican Party, like we have, as an Indian, like we have 2 Indian origins from who are contesting as a primary candidate from the Republican Party. One is Vivek Ramaswamy, and the second one is Nikki Haley. So Nikki Haley was expected in the beginning to be performing really well, but she seems to be down below even Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a newcomer to politics. What is your comment on Nikki Haley policies or past performance, or as far as you can imagine about her performance?
This is going to be totally based in my own opinion, which a lot of it is, but sometimes, I've read a bunch of things. This is just my feeling. If the Republican Party tomorrow, and I'm talking about the party officials, I'm talking about the money, I'm talking about marketing, not just somebody living in central Pennsylvania. If they decided Nikki Haley was their candidate, she would win. I think she definitely the nomination, and I think she would be very formidable against Biden in a general. I think she's not radical, in the sense of, I'm not even talking ideology. She has said, like, this is how we govern her. She's a governor. Like, she knows how government works, and is conservative, but practical, maybe is what I would say. And so I think she is never going to garner the attention that is necessary to win a Republican primary, because at this point, it has become Trump politics in the primary. You have to be loud. You have to say scandalous or radical things. That is how somebody like Vivek with no experience can come on the scene and blast it apart, as he said some really controversial things and things that really got people on both sides arguing and discussing. And so his name is everywhere. Nikki Haley says, like, well, this is how we do things. And her past performance has shown that she's a traditional Republican, but I'm not sure it's enough to win the nomination. I would be wildly surprised. And if she did, it meant that like some really powerful folks got together and decided they'd had enough of Trump, but they can't seem to. So I think she would be a very strong candidate on the right, but not in today's climate. I don't see it happening.
Because in the last debates, she was quite distinguished in herself when it comes to foreign policy, and she accused Vivek of like not having any experience, and it shows. That's what she literally quoted. And I think experience is one very important factor as well. But I think the majority of the people, what they want to hear is more of a very populistic ideals. Like people don't seem to want to hear the so-called from the career politicians, which is very common in America. So I think this is the factor that is also playing a very huge role in determining Vivek as one of the rising stars in the Republican candidates. Before we conclude with the last question, I mean, I want to understand also in India, in a country like India, money is very important for election. In smaller states, like where I am right now, money plays a huge role, and you don't use that money just for election campaign purpose, but you pay to the voters, and voters give their votes based on how much you receive money from your candidates. So I believe, and I'm sure that such things would not occur in the United States, because people are more aware of their rights. People are more aware of the manifestos of the campaigns of the parties, and they give their vote based on policies in general case. So how does people decide their votes normally? Like you as a person, or you as someone who has worked for a presidential campaign in 2008?
I would say the majority. So anyone going to vote on election day, it would be easy to kind of split it up into three groups. I don't think it's an equal three representation, but there are folks that go to the ballot already knowing exactly what party they're going to vote for. There's a thing here called straight ticket voting, and I don't see it used much anymore, but especially in the 80s and 90s, in kind of these areas that were solidly one party or the other, at the very top, you could click Republican or Democrat and it would vote all the way down. You just literally had to click one button, or X or punch or whatever you did. So there is a portion of the voters that don't even think about it. There's a portion of the voters that are very involved and really care about the election and tend to lean one way, but maybe for president, they always vote one party, but for their local, they'll actually consider who's doing what. They're a small they're a small percentage of voters that spend that much time, because even I've been overwhelmed going to some elections thinking, oh, which one was it? And you rely on your family that might be more involved, and they say, oh, we're all voting for this. And, it's tradition. And then there's allegedly, well, there's a strong independent streak in America where we call them independent voters, or center voters, or swing voters. And what they mean is they genuinely haven't decided until that election who they're going to vote for. And so campaigns try to get out there and convince them they're persuadable. I think that number is shrinking with every election because of how polarized it is. And actually, that's an important piece of democracy, is that you come with an open mind. And I don't think we're seeing it as much as we were in, for example, 2008, when I was knocking on doors in small towns and talking with folks that genuinely were like, we'll see how this goes. Tell me about your guy.
That's very interesting. I think that's how, US distinguishes itself from the rest of the world. Election and voting pattern in US is solely dependent mostly on, like say, the policies and the promises that the candidate makes for the country, or for whatever policies that they're engaged with the people. My last question would be, will the gender identity politics play an important role in determining the winner of this election? Because when you look at Democratic Party, they are very much into it. And when you look at the Republican Party, they are deadly against it. So what is your view on that?
Well, to go back to, the earlier point, do Democrats even care about normal folks? That's the perception on the right, and it's easy to say when they say, hey, I can't buy a house, or I'm about to lose my mortgage, or I'm not making any real money, or milk is $5 a gallon. It's really hard to have those every single day in front of you and then have a Democratic politician saying, you're a bad person. This is how they perceive it. I'm not saying Democratic politicians say this. You're a bad person because you didn't identify that person right, or everything's an identity. And I think it will be hard. I don't know it'll be a decisive factor, but the right has woke and going anti-woke, even though they can't define it. And this has been a phenomenon that like I've touched on some of my Deutsche Welle coverage, as well as like even Ron DeSantis has mentioned like, oh yeah, I changed the meaning. And the whole point is it's not based in fact. They're not saying, oh, here's how this actually impacts you. They're using it as a smokescreen. Don't look at what we're actually doing. It's not about policies. It's about get mad at that guy. And it's a very us versus them. And on the left, they have everything steeped in identity. And I think it creates fatigue in some of those center voters saying, all right, I'm an okay person. Sorry, I didn't know everything I was supposed to know. But, I go to work and I give to charity and I'm kind to my neighbor. So I do think it is going to trip up both sides. And I do think it will come up, but perhaps a slight advantage to Biden is he's a little outside of that conversation, partly by his age, and of course it'll still be lobbed at him. And I think he's an incredibly progressive in a lot of those areas, but he's like an old grandpa. So it's a little harder versus maybe if you had a young candidate or a candidate of color or a woman to kind of put there. So I definitely think we're going to see more of it, unfortunately, because to me, I'm not saying it's not a real issue. I'm saying the way politicians use it is they don't care. On the right, when they're saying anti-woke, they don't actually care about, okay, so you're doing that. What are you doing about making sure people with kids get a little break so that they can afford daycare? And on the left, all right, so what are you doing to make sure there's more affordable housing? So, I think it will come up, and it's part of that polarization and culture war that America is just churning through. And I hope as we move forward, we find ways to come back together and to kind of move past that, and also say like, we can be empathetic, progressive people while also caring about average people.
Amazing. I think thanks so much for sharing a very well balanced and, sharing the insights that you gain from the ground itself. And I hope we can have like this one more time as the election campaign gains momentum in the future.
I would love it. Yeah. Keep in touch. It's going to be exciting.
Let's do this. Thank you so much, Liz, for this.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, this is so much fun. And I personally learned a lot from your experience and from your views. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.